Welcome to our webinar today. I'm Barb Protasio, Yale College, class of 1981. I'm an executive officer of 1stGenYale. And before we start, I'd like to go over our structure for today. So the event's going to last until 8:15 tonight. We'll go a little longer than maybe the early webinars you've been to. Please set your controls for both audio and video on the bottom left of your screen. Everyone will be in listening mode, so you will be muted. You can use the chat feature, however, for comments, the question and answer session, and to share your email addresses if you'd like. Our presentation will be recorded today. Now, I'd like to welcome our guests to come on screen. Please turn on the active speaker mode. Welcome to our webinar for Yale students and alumni. Meet Yaleys who graduated into the financial crisis of 2008 and 2009. What is your COVID-19 story? Today, we find ourselves in one of the most challenging employment environments we have faced as a country. Many current students and recent graduates have watched internships and full-time job opportunities disappear and are still searching for positions. Alumni of all ages are finding similar difficult times. But Yaleys have faced these challenges before, as in the 2008 and 2009 economic crisis. So I'm sharing with you on the screen a picture of the class of 2009 on their graduation day. But they faced these challenges before, and they've landed on their feet. At the time, the crisis was the worst US economic disaster since the Great Depression. In the United States, the stock market plummeted, wiping out nearly $8 trillion in value between late 2007 and 2009. Unemployment climbed, peaking at about 10% in October 2009, and Americans lost trillions in wealth as their home values plummeted and their retirement accounts vaporized. But we are excited to host 6 Yale alumni who made it through the crisis and will share their stories, because key elements of career exploration and securing an internship or job are telling your story and connecting with your employers. We hope that hearing their stories and advice will help you develop your own strategies to navigate through today's challenge. So we're going to now hear from our panelists, and I'm excited to introduce you to our guest panelists. As I call them up on the screen, please wave, and I will make sure that your panelists can see you. And I'm going to stop sharing my screen right now so that we can see our panelists. Can my helper please make sure we can stop sharing our screen at this time? There we go. Okay, so our panelists today are 5 of our class of 2008 and 2009, Andrew Bartholomew, Nicole Brenner. Make sure that you're getting a chance to wave and say hello, and that way your screen will light up for them. Emma Chapman.
Hi.
Andrew Deddy.
Hello.
Catherine Lee and Jaime Tori.
Hello.
Hello.
They're all from the classes of 08 or 09. And then Brian Furnett, from our Senior Associate Director at the Yale Office of Career Services, will act as moderator. Brian, thank you for being with us here today. Please go ahead and take the floor.
All right, so thank you everybody for joining us today. I will be working with our panelists here. I'd like to give an opportunity for all of our panelists to introduce themselves. And we'll start with Nicole Brenner, class of '08.
Thank you. So happy to be here. I'm Nicole Benner, as Pearson '08. I majored in chemistry. I'm currently a program manager for a UX design and research team within ads at Google. I live in New York and joined Google back in 2016 after being in education for about 10 years. I've held a variety of roles, I've jumped sectors, and I've lived all over the country. I'm from Miami originally, did Teach for America in New Orleans, started Google in Austin, and now I'm in New York City. But the common theme is I have a very deep passion for communities, especially underserved communities, and what can be accomplished when teams are the most effective working together to solve amazing problems. I'm happy to be here and happy to share a little bit more about myself during this panel, but I'll turn it over to the next speaker.
Okay, our next speaker will be Nicole Brenner or Andrew Bartholomew, either one of you.
Hi, everyone. My name is Andrew. I was a '09 psychology major, and after graduating, moved to New York. I thought I was going to be going to law school at some point, knew I wanted to do something around public policy, and quickly took a job after school as a paralegal. It was pretty much the first and only job I could find. About 10 months later, I switched to working at the district attorney's office in Manhattan. Spent a couple of years there, and through a sort of variety of pieces of good fortune, ended up getting access to a lot of data and learning how to code, and spent the next couple of years advising on policy decisions using data analysis with code that my team was working on. I applied to law school, got in, and just sort of decided that wasn't something I wanted to do and felt a little bit risky at the time. So I changed directions and applied for a job at a company called Squarespace, which was a small software startup in New York. And I've spent the last 8 years at Squarespace. I started as essentially an entry-level data analyst, and I left at the end of February after 8 years there as an exec managing a team of about 50. The company went from about 60 people when I started to about 1,200 at the time that I left. It was a great experience, a wild ride. And I knew sort of in the middle of last year that I wanted to take some time off and think about what I was going to do next. So I planned on leaving at the end of February and giving up my apartment to spend a year traveling the world with my wife, which has not worked out as planned. And so now I'm in my childhood bedroom at my parents' house without an apartment or a job, trying to figure out what I'm going to be doing next. So I'm probably in the same boat as a lot of you are.
All right, thank you very much, Andrew. And then we're going to go with Emma Chapman.
Hi, my name is Emma Chapman. I was '09 D-Court, majored in political science and history of art. I also swim at Yale, and I currently live and work in Chicago in transportation. I'm originally from the East Coast and moved out to the Midwest about 7 years ago. The history of cities and architecture focus of my undergraduate classes actually led me to my thesis on Yale's train station, which showed me that transportation was a job that like someone was going to pay me to do. I absolutely loved what I was doing and what I was learning through my thesis. So I wanted to continue that. And I wanted to continue working in transportation no matter what. So the first job I took that was available, the only job that was available, right after graduating was a fellowship with the Eno Transportation Foundation. They were going to pay me, or they did pay me, $10 an hour, which is the lowest salary I ever earned. It was lower than what I was paid as a lifeguard. It was lower than what I was paid as a babysitter. And I took it because that was the opportunity. It was in the right field, and it was where I wanted to live. There were no security, no benefits, nothing, but it was in the step in the right direction.
All right, Emma, that was quite a risk that you took. We'd like to see what happened next. All right, Andrew Deddy, please join in.
Hello. So my name is Andy Deddy. I am a newly graduated physician
starting my family medicine residency in just a couple of weeks, but currently temping as a full-time dad in the meantime, living in Columbus, Ohio, and I'm going to be at Grant Medical Center starting in June. I'm from Rochester, New York originally. I was DPort 09. I majored in history of science and medicine and played rugby at Yale. In 2008, I had the idea in my head. I'd met one health planner who had an MPH and a law degree, and I decided I was going to do that exact same thing. So I applied for the 5-year bachelor's MPH program, ultimately didn't get in. And then the next year, really a similar story to Andrew's, I decided to go full tilt on the legal route and just apply to every paralegal position that OCS had. Got one interview in March of that year, and fortunately landed the job as a legal analyst at a small civil litigation firm in New York. So I started in the fall of 09 to see if the law was for me, and similarly, it was not for me at the time. So in the spring of 2010, I actually made the somewhat agonizing decision to leave a job in the middle of that economy, and just started blanketing New York City with resumes. I was sort of coming up on the end of an apartment lease and had a deadline, and didn't meet that deadline. Didn't hear back from anything I submitted. Moved back to Rochester that summer, submitted a ton of resumes and cover letters, and nothing back for most of that summer too. So ultimately, I did end up hearing back at the end of that summer after holding down some lifeguarding jobs and living with my folks, and certainly being humbled a little bit, and got a job at the United Hospital Fund of New York doing Medicaid and health insurance policy analysis. And that really kickstarted about 6 years that I spent doing a mix of the policy analysis, a bit of consulting, a bit of advocacy on behalf of managed care plans in New York, and then ultimately pushed me toward medicine. I got interested in the future of primary care and being a part of that future. So moved to Columbus in 2014. This is my then girlfriend, now wife's hometown, and didn't want to go from earning an income to the opposite when I was going back to school to do my prereqs for med school. And I've been here ever since. I did medical school here, and now I'm going to be doing residency here, and live here with my wife, my son, and my dog. And this wasn't the plan I had in 08, 09, but I'm very happy with it, where I ended up, and happy to field any questions about that as we move forward. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Andy. And next, Catherine Lee.
Hi, my name is Catherine. So I graduated in 09. I also majored in history of science and medicine. After I graduated, and I was in Calhoun College, now Hopper College. After I graduated from Yale, I took a year off and I worked in Washington, D.C. I worked for a physician's office. I ran a physician's office. It's actually a job I found through the alumni network. It was a physician who went to Princeton, but only wanted to hire people who had who were coming out of Ivy League schools, who were in the transition between undergrad and medical school. It turned out to be a job I hated because he kind of catered to the upper class and was a concierge medicine practice. But I was happy with that year because I spent the rest of my time doing community service in underserved populations. I did apply to medical school that year. Working there did not dissuade me from medical school, just convinced me to work with a different population. I went to medical school back home in Honolulu. I eventually came back to the East Coast. I first was a general surgery resident, but realized I liked plastic surgery and basic science. So I actually spent some time in the laboratory at Memorial Sloan Kettering before transferring to plastic and reconstructive surgery residency back at Yale. So I'm back now. I'm a 4th year resident with 2 more years to go, and I will be doing a microsurgery fellowship. So I will be focusing on doing reconstruction after cancer and trauma, and I hope to work at an academic medical center eventually.
And I'm Jaime Totti, and I also graduated from Yale College in 2009. I was also in Grace Hopper College. I'm married to Catherine now. And I also just graduated from Yale again from the School of Drama and the School of Management just now 2 weeks ago. And so I'm kind of in the same position again twice. I'm from New York City originally. I majored in theater studies when I was at Yale, and I graduated and took an internship at a small theater company in Chicago. Made ends meet by working in a restaurant for 3 years while I sort of plied my trade and made a couple of shows, got a few internships or small jobs or gigs in some of the larger theaters in the city to keep things together, and then eventually moved back home to New York, took a job working in a company management office for Broadway and off-Broadway productions, and then eventually decided that the next best move for my career would go back to school. And when I looked at the Yale School of Drama, I kind of fell in love with the program here. So I just graduated from the theater management program at YSD, and am back in the job hunting mode while we stay in New Haven for another couple of years.
Did you mention business school?
Yes, I
Yes.
did.
All right, thank you so much. Brian, are you here with us?
So Brian is having slight technical difficulties. I'm going to step in just for a little bit, and he'll probably come back around. I think the second question we were going to follow up on the panel was.
And Derek, will you please introduce
Oh
yourself?
yeah, sorry, I forgot that I haven't
No,
been
that's
introduced
fine.
yet. Derek Webster, class of '99, also Pearson College. I also work in the Office of Career Strategy. Go Pearson! P is for the P. I work with a lot of the students who are focused on creative careers. I'm the Associate Director for the Arts. I wasn't scheduled to be on this one, but I'm happy to jump in and help out. So, we went through the panel and heard some great sort of introductory, context. What was it like when you graduated? What did that first bit feel like? I think, one of the reasons we put this together was kind of taking those two lines and thinking about how did things feel in 08, 09, and how do things feel kind of echoed perhaps for some of the graduating seniors right now. So maybe we could go back through the list, starting with Nicole, and just extend the thought a little bit. Try to draw those lines and help us to understand, based upon what you survived and made your way through, what kind of advice would you share? What kind of context would you bring forward in order to help out our webinar audience to know that this thing has happened before or something like it, and that that there are things that we can do to move forward with it. Nicole, would you like to start?
Sure. Thanks, Derek. So just to give a little bit of a picture of what Yale was like when I was an undergrad back in 2008, and I know that folks are all in different places in terms of whether they just finished undergrad or just finished graduate school. But just from the perspective of an undergrad, there were very few smartphones. There wasn't even internet in the courtyards. I'm assuming there is now. And the news cycle just wasn't what it is today. And so we didn't have that kind of information deluge that you all are experiencing. And I think the way that we really felt the impact of the recession and the changes that the economy was facing and how it impacted us was through one another. And the experiences that we were having as interviews and the opportunities that were showing up and weren't showing up in comparison. And I say that to say that I think there was just a little bit lack of awareness into just what we were going into, and so you have that awareness a little bit more, and also that means a little bit more preparedness. And so I would say when it comes to the advice, what you probably noticed about pretty much every single person on this panel is that even if we set out to do one thing according to a certain plan, our paths diverted. And some of that was with intention, some of that was because of the recession, and I think a lot of it is because that's just how careers are for generations, moving forward. And so I would say, with after that long preamble, my biggest advice is, you know, if you have a plan and you're feeling like it is very much spoiled or, you know, off course, you know, sit down and think, what are some other passions? What are some other things that were alternatives? And exploring those and leaving those as opportunities instead of looking at them as a deviation from your plan and a stepping stone to getting to your plan is really, you know, big. I did Teach for America, and just as a reminder, my name's Nicole. I did Teach for America and then ended up in tech, and that's a pretty big leap. But all of the skills that I had from managing a classroom and then being an assistant principal and a lot of the other roles that I had in education are what made me such a great candidate for working at Google. So just to, you know, make sure I like really communicate it is instead of feeling like you're off track for your plan, figure out what are other things that are really awesome that can make you an even better candidate for your plan the following few years.
Thanks, Nicole. That's great. Particularly that idea, I think it's sometimes easy for us to forget how hard that first step always is. This is certainly an extreme circumstance and one that's, you know, the walls are pretty high, but you know, there's also something natural in the process of trying to find the best of the version given the context. So that's some really great advice. Thank you. Andrew, did you want to extend your story? You're still muted.
Sorry about that. I think Nicole's point is really well put, which is whatever plan you have is going to turn out differently. And I think in general, the mantra of sort of don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good is really useful to have in mind. My impression, and I apologize, Derek, at the risk of slandering UCS, but my impression as an undergrad was that the number of types of jobs you could take was pretty biased towards large institutional employers, whether that's banks or consulting firms or whatever it may be, because those are the kinds of organizations that are engaging with big organizations like Yale. But most of the jobs out in the world don't look like that. They're with small companies and nonprofits and all kinds of other things. And it's hard to find those things as an undergrad in your dorm room. And the only way to find them is to get out in the world and learn about it. And that is going to be full of surprises. And that's totally fine. That's exciting. That's like what figuring out what your career is going to be like. And so you may have an idea of what you want your career exactly to look like, and it's going to turn out differently, and that's totally fine. And just getting comfortable with that is a totally reasonable and in fact good thing to do, I think. I think relatedly, like from a lot of us, you've heard the theme of like, we took the first job we could get. And I think that's actually pretty useful advice. Momentum matters a lot, and just do something is not the worst advice. I think it's really helpful in sort of kickstarting that discovery process. And it's pretty complementary, I think, to the idea of not letting the perfect be the enemy of the good. Getting out in the workforce will give you a chance to keep moving and to keep learning about what's out there and what you like and what you don't like. And it's hard to imagine what that's going to be a little bit in advance. Two other things really quickly. Like one, I decided not to go to law school. And part of the reason for that was how I was thinking about risk. And going to law school actually struck me as quite a risky thing to do at the time. The economy was not great. It's expensive. It's 3 years of not earning an income. And you may be committing to a profession that you don't enjoy in the long run. And so I think thinking carefully about what actually represents risk, sometimes sitting on the sidelines rather than taking a less ideal job, is the riskier choice to make. And so being careful about how you think about risk in your career and forward momentum is generally a not risky strategy. And so I think being careful about opportunity cost and optionality is really, really useful in thinking through what to do and what not to do. And then the last thing is, like, it goes without saying that everything that's happening in the world has nothing to do with us as individuals. It's something completely outside of our control, and you are still you. You know, like, you are just as curious and employable as you were 3 months ago, you're just less likely to get employed. And that's for reasons that have nothing to do with you. It's a sort of act of God. So I think it's important to know that even if the world is a mess right now, which it is, that will hopefully get better. It will get better, and you will still be the same person you were 3 months ago, and you will be that person 3 months from now too. So it's useful to just kind of keep your head up and keep focused on the things that you can control, and understand that there are most things you can.
Thank you, Andrew. That's fantastic. I love that, and hard to remember, that things have not changed so dramatically that we're different people, and the skills and the transferables we still have in place. I like that. The one piece, just to mention, and this is the case when I was an undergrad as well. UCS, which it was back then, and not OCS, is certainly a very different species. 10 years ago in 2020. And so it's true that there's a certain ease in the recruiting cycles, and it's kind of the OCR version of like the large banks and consulting and that sort of thing. But there's a lot of resource available through OCS to try to help find those smaller companies, find those smaller outlets, find the less followed path. And I would say that I work often with students who are asking this question right now about what happens right now when they're looking at resources that are very barren, right? Like jobs boards and aggregators without a lot of positions available. But just like you mentioned, that we're still the same people, the graduating senior is still the same person. Those jobs boards will be very different, 3 months from now, 5 months from now, 6 months from now. So yeah, thank you for that. I appreciate it. Emma, did you want to extend your narrative?
Yeah, sure. Thanks. So branching off of what Nicole and Andrew have already said, I mean, I learned about the Lehman Brothers collapse from the front page of an actual New York Times physical paper that was sitting on the table outside of the Davenport Dining Hall. And this was September of 2008. Like, I knew they were an investment bank. I sort of had an idea. I think my dad had worked there like back when I was 0 or non-existent. Like, I had no idea what was going on. And so it definitely took our class and everything kind of by storm. And what was interesting about what we all experienced with the Career Services Office is that the management consulting firms and the iBanking firms, because they have the financial resources to heavily recruit, they were still heavily recruiting. So it was like, am I going to go join something that it was very confusing. It was very confusing. And when Andrew said about you can't, it's very hard to get into the small niches from your dorm room. I had a lot of challenge trying to do that. I mean, I was on the phone. I was lucky enough to be in a senior studio next to some good friends of mine. And I was on the phone constantly trying to learn about the field of transportation and the industry of transportation and what people actually did to get paid in this industry. And none of these conversations started with, please hire me. They started with, what do you do? How did you get there? And I can't remember how many people I talked to, hundreds of people. And I wrote down all of their stories. I took notes, and I learned through those conversations maybe what I would like and didn't like in the field, and kind of which path I should go. And a bunch of things that became very clear from those conversations is that not a lot of people who make transportation plans know a lot about how it's paid for. So that was something I hadn't gotten into yet, but it was always in the back of my mind. And it seemed like I needed to figure out where decisions were made on a policy level, then how the plans were kind of formulated on the ground level, city by city, town by town, then figure out where the money came from in order to put all the pieces together. Now that sounds very organized and kind of like, wow, I had my shit together. Well, I didn't. So the first job I took, as I said, was $10 an hour. No one would give me a lease, obviously. It was kind of for 3 months, but Eno was able to keep it on for a little bit longer. And WMATA, the Washington, D.C. agency that's their subway, was able to pull together a semi full-time gig. It was full-time in that it was 40 hours a week, but there was, again, no health insurance, no vacation, no benefits, right? So I had to figure out how to get health insurance. I was on a couch for 3 or 4 months until I could land a lease. And it was, this was not, it wasn't a dream. Like, it wasn't like my plan. I didn't really have a plan. The only plan I kind of had was I didn't want to, sorry, Andrew, end up at my parents' house. That was the only thing I wanted. I wanted to just not be at my parents' house. And a big thing I think I learned from graduating was that just because I liked cities and architecture and history, that the only route to keep going on that isn't necessarily just a graduate degree. It might be a graduate degree in a little bit, but it didn't have to be. And I know a lot of people went straight into a master's program because that's a good idea if the economy's crashing, right? Because there aren't a lot of jobs. If that's kind of your trajectory, and it wasn't mine. And these conversations really, really pointed me to what I didn't want to do and what I didn't want to learn. And that's how I got to what I wanted to figure out. And one thing led to another. I mean, it definitely wasn't smooth. The Washington, D.C. summers are really hot, and they start in like March. So I'm born in February. So I was like, I got to get out of here. I was there for about a year and a half. There was an opportunity in New York to do infrastructure, environmental, urban planning. So I took that and was able to financially survive there for only about 3 years until I realized that the cost of living in that city is not exactly something that works for most industries unless you're directly in finance. I had also kind of gotten sick of the lifestyle of everyone being on top of you. It's also really hot in the summer. You're seeing a pattern here. And the East Coast childhood I had, I wanted to kind of experience other parts of the country. And I came to Chicago in 2011 visiting a friend, and I had never been here before. And I landed at Chicago's O'Hare Airport, and I got on the CTA Blue Line to go downtown. New York doesn't have those plane to train connections. Those connections still don't exist. And I was blown away, especially when the train goes above the ground. And like, I'm a little bit of a transportation nerd, and you can see the tracks and like see everything. It was just like Brooklyn's L. I mean, it was just beautiful, right? So I was like, I got to move here. And I got to figure it out. And it wasn't time yet, but I had to put something together. A few years later, the same company I was working for in New York needed someone in Chicago to kind of do some environmental planning work because a colleague of mine was moving to Korea to be in their office. So I jumped on that. It wasn't exactly an ideal project because I didn't wholly believe in the morality of the project, but they were going to pay me, right? It was this greenfield toll road through farmland. I mean, what, we need more roads in this country, please. So obviously the deal didn't go through, actually, because the financing didn't work. And I moved to Chicago, and it was, I mean, I didn't know a soul here. I knew zero people. I knew one person in Washington, D.C., and it was an old swimmer on the team who actually, she was the one whose couch I could be on. So point is, use your Yale network, just ask. She was welcome to have me on the couch. It was temporary. And I knew I could go to a city again, not knowing anybody because I had done it before. And it was terrifying, but I had the job network. And the segue into finance, which is what I'm doing now, and I guess have been doing for the last 5-6 years, is when I was in New York, the questions resurfaced of how do you pay for all these transportation projects? I mean, it's all over the news, right? The trust fund's going bankrupt, the roads are falling apart, our infrastructure grade is an F. I mean, all this stuff, right? And it still hasn't been answered, but that's where I pointed my career once I had kind of not mastered, but gotten a grasp of how plans were made. And I'm still learning. You're always still learning. I'm almost done with my MBA because, so got into graduate school, right? 10 years later, 10 years after undergrad, I went and decided to do a graduate degree. And I'm at the University of Illinois in Chicago, and I chose the state program because of its flexibility, letting me work alongside being at school, and the very, flexible schedules. Like it's all over the place. There are tons of opportunities for continued learning, not just what you immediately think. Especially now, universities are offering things for free. I think Northwestern is offering all these coding classes for free for new grads and young alums to continue to add to their toolbox if there aren't opportunities readily available. So what Andrew said, right? Do something. Do something. It doesn't matter what it is. Keep learning. Keep making yourself a valuable asset. And it's not your fault that this whole global crisis took over. And it's definitely good training for being on the job, because you can't take work personally. You have to have some amount of emotion in it. But if your stuff isn't good or no one likes it, it doesn't mean you're a bad person. It just means you have to learn to do what they want. So I think that's kind of my 2 cents. It's been a little long-winded, but you're gonna screw up. It's gonna hurt. You're gonna cry, and you're gonna be okay. Just hang in there.
That's great. Thank you, Emma. I appreciate it. I also really interesting you touched on where additional education fits into this on a couple levels, right? That initially it was not something you were thinking of, but then 10 years later you came back around. I think a lot of students that were, I might be
correct you, because I was trying to go, I was like, I'm going to go urban planning. I'm going to get a master's in this. And I spent, I don't know, tons of time trying to research programs. I ended up not doing it, both in terms of costs, and I wasn't really sold on it.
Yeah, so the idea is that our students right now, the graduating seniors, are often asking themselves just those kinds of questions, and they're thinking through, should I take the gap year? Should I go directly in? Is this because of the environment I'm finding myself in right now? Should I potentially change my plan or put it off or come back around? All those sorts of things. So thank you. I think that touched on some really interesting territory for our students. Andy, did you want to extend your story?
Yeah. That's a good segue, since I sort of took a gap 7 years prior to starting medical school. And I guess that would get me to the first piece of advice I would have, which would be, you don't have to rush into your goals, and your 10-year plan doesn't have to happen in a year. Personally, professionally, and just in terms of having done the necessary prereqs, I wouldn't have been ready to start medical school right out of undergrad. And the ability to accumulate some experience along the way, wherever you're bringing it, to a master's degree, to a doctorate degree in whatever field, whatever you're doing in the meantime, if you're doing something in the meantime, is going to flavor your contribution to your school and to your profession, whatever it might be. So I wouldn't advise that everyone do medical school in their late 20s if that's what their path is, but I would never discourage anyone based on age or time from pursuing something. The world is always out there, and I have classmates in their 40s, 40s and 50s who are graduating with us. I think the second piece would be to build on something I said. There will be times that it will really hurt, and your self-worth and self-value can really plummet if you are not hearing answers back to things that you submit, or if you're getting silence on the other end, or you have something that you think went really well, and you get the letter, dear Mr. Deddy, it was a pleasure to speak to you. Like, I think Yale prepared me in some ways for just being, you're surrounded by people who all seem to be doing incredible things and have everything figured out and everything together. And first of all, not everyone has it together. And second of all, even if they do, that's whatever's happening for them doesn't have to be part of your journey. So through all that, persistence and volume are the things that'll pay off. And once something is the right thing, you're not going to know when it is. You're not going to know when serendipity is going to bring it to your door. So if you're looking for something, it can be just a volume game. And the more you put yourself out there, even if it's painful and even if it's frustrating, you miss 100% of the shots you don't take. So, and certainly working, my positions didn't end up coming from the connections I had made, but I know that making them gave me better odds of finding something that would suit me. just talking to my friends, Andrew among them. I remember, I feel like Andrew was responsible for 2 interviews I got, and I'll always be grateful for that, and certainly return the favor to anyone I can. And then finally, one of the best pieces of career advice I ever got was to, whether it's as your hobby or whether you're already on the job, it was from an attorney I was working with. He said, I just found the thing that no one else knew anything about and just learned the most I could about it so that I would be valuable and my knowledge would be a commodity. And when I came out of school, or I guess when I was looking for a job the second time, the Affordable Care Act had just passed. And even though I wasn't working in the field and I was working elsewhere, just in my free time, I was reading up as much as I could about it, having an interest in the policy world and just trying to make myself as marketable as possible, even in my spare time, just to be conversational in it. And I think right now there's probably a lot of opportunities with this other big new thing that not a lot of people know a lot about. And there are opportunities, whether it's becoming knowledgeable or leaning into the contact tracing opportunities, the volunteer opportunities that are available to support the public health infrastructure that's going to make this country tick over the next couple of years. I think there are probably opportunities that didn't exist 4 months ago, even if there are fewer of them and they're different than they might have looked and they pay differently than what might have been there. I'd encourage you to explore everything that's out there.
That's great, Andy. Thank you. And I really appreciate the note on this is a long game, right? It can be hard to keep that in mind because you feel like, particularly at Yale, I mean, you come out and as you mentioned, you see all these people, came in quite successful and are leaving hopefully successful. And it can be hard, to feel like the immediacy of that is not necessarily going to manifest. But if you have the longer game and you can sort of build from those smaller pieces, that's really great advice. Catherine, Jamie, do you guys want to extend your story?
Yeah, sure. I would reiterate everything that everyone else has said. When I went to college and when I graduated, I initially thought like, none of this matters to me. I wanted to be a doctor. I have a straight shot, but it turns out, as everyone said, and as we learned from everyone's stories, nothing occurs according to plan. I mean, I ended up being a doctor, but I would have never guessed that I would be doing what I'm doing now. I never thought, and the reason why all these twists and turns happen was because I learned so much from the people around me at Yale, and it taught me to kind of open my eyes to other opportunities. I mean, for a while, I thought that I would be a graphic designer, and that's from my time at the YDN with Andrew Bartholomew. So, and then I decided to take a gap year because I didn't know, I wanted to know what the real world was like. And then just a lot of twists and turns happened that, I never thought I would want to do reconstructive surgery. I didn't know what reconstructive surgery was. And in medicine, I feel like it's people think that medicine is, just one field, but it's very heterogeneous. And I think I got to where I was because I tried to kind of experience as much as I can, and experiencing all those things and being able to rule things out as a result of those experiences led me to a field that I never imagined before, but one that I'm very excited to be a part of.
Yeah, in a lot of ways, Catherine and I had very, very different paths. So I can always speak on like a different perspective. Like Andy and Emma, I also waited a really long time before I went back to school, right? I went back to school also 7 years after I had graduated from college. And so like in the field that I'm in at the time, at the level that I was entering, right, for an entry level person in theater in 2009, I didn't necessarily even hear that much about what was going on. Now as a theater manager who knows what is going on, I know what the people who were running the companies at the time were going through. I totally get it, but for me as an entry level, it didn't pick up that much for me. What I did and what I tried to focus on was finding the community of people who were doing the work that I wanted to be doing and starting to make inroads with that community. I think I made the interesting choice of moving to Chicago, which is not where a whole lot of Yale performing arts people tend to go. We tend to go to the nearest city to New Haven, which is New York. But so I was sort of building a community from scratch. But even that, I think, sort of to Andy's point of like just getting out there and building your network and taking your shots because it improves your odds. For me, I felt like just going out there and starting to scratch away and meet people and make connections and build that network, even if it didn't directly come to fruition, even if like one of the people I met didn't necessarily hire me in the future, just the practice, the ability to keep doing it and keep working at it, built my confidence and built my experience so that when I came back to New York, I immediately plugged in with my network, and I immediately got, I mean, I came back with like to take a new job, but I sort of immediately was able to grow that into something real. And then when the time came to like consider, okay, now I've found some real stability, I'm working, but like my career trajectory can go in this direction that I'm not super excited about, or I can stay right here and kind of stall out, or I can go to grad school. That was when the time was right to go to grad school, right? So like, you don't have to rush into anything. If you're out there plugging away and working at it and meeting people and building your own strengths and your own confidence and your own point of view, what like developing what it is that you want to accomplish out there in the world, then when you find the right spot, you find the right spot, and and then you take off.
That's great, thank you. Yeah, and thanks for the reminder too. I mean, sometimes graduating seniors, particularly in the arts, can feel like the major closest metropolitan area is the only place to go, which is not the case. And you know, perhaps particularly in a time frame like now, those alternate paths are definitely places to look. So that's a great reminder. I want to make sure that we leave enough room for Q&A and to go around more broadly and hear from the audience. But Nicole, I wanted to follow up quickly with one thing. You had mentioned Teach for America, and that it had sort of not necessarily been initially the thing that you were planning on doing. Could you tell us more about that experience and any sort of transferable skills that you were able to extract from those early decisions that might have even helped you out down the road?
Absolutely. So my father did private tutoring and taught a lot of different languages as I was growing up. And I really looked up to him and wanted to be a teacher. And then, going to Yale, I was like, well, maybe I should make more money. And that's what all my friends' parents said. So I pivoted and went on a path to get a PhD and be a professor in chemistry. But, like being a professor in chemistry as an idea versus actually in practice is very different. And I really didn't like working in labs. That's another part about your plan. Like the image that you have of a job is so different than the reality of it. And I think it's a little bit about what Catherine was talking about, and it's important to know that even if this wasn't going on, your plan could change because you tried it and we're like, oh no. So that's what happened to me with wanting to be a professor. I was like, that's not happening. And I kind of panicked, and I went to a TFA info session. It was recruiting heavily. I knew a ton of other folks in Pearson who were moving to New Orleans. It was right after Katrina. And I was back to plan of being a teacher. And I loved it. I really loved working with kids. They're fun and exciting and greenfield. And I love the community of a school. And teaching was not at all what I thought it would be. I thought it was going to be about talking what I was passionate about all day. Like, listen to me talk about chemistry. And that's not what it is. It's part of it, but there's a lot of other components, which I'm happy to talk about. But in the interest of time, I'll skip that. So I pivoted and moved into the administration side of things, and would realize that the elements that I really enjoyed about teaching, a lot of like curriculum planning, program planning, was something I wanted to learn more about in the corporate field. So I actually ended up getting my job at Google because I went to the 25th anniversary summit for TFA, and they were recruiting there. It's a huge pipeline. Teachers, it's to this day, like being a teacher and an assistant principal, the hardest jobs I've ever had. The amount of balls that are in the air at the same time that you have to juggle, and the relationship building. So just to be really candid and specific, the transferable skills: project planning, facilitating, presenting, stakeholder management, relationship management. Those are the kinds of things that were foundational as a teacher, and that I think made me really appealing, in addition to a lot of the other administrative roles around analyzing data and such. Does that answer your question, Derek?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's extremely helpful. Okay, so we are opened up to Q&A now. So go ahead and post your questions in the chat, and we can read those off as they come. As we wait for any questions from the audience, I can kind of just throw a couple of additional questions out to anyone who'd like to chime in. One of them we might take a look at would be maybe a deeper dive a little bit on, and I think a number of you mentioned the networking side, right, and the fallback on taking advantage of those things. If anyone wanted to talk a little bit more about how the networking fit in, what it looked like, what some of the specific resources they used then, and even maybe some of the resources that weren't available then that you might be thinking about, that you could recommend for our students now. Yeah, anyone want to take that? Any takers?
This is Andy. I'm happy to take a first crack. I think for me, networking was never anything that came very naturally to me, and the cliche networking is a dirty word, and really what it came down to was at a time of necessity, I just started emailing people, both to catch up and just to check in on what they were up to and what might be available. I think like Emma said, I wouldn't lead off, hey, I need a job, but I think I just started getting in touch with people I might not have otherwise, and checking in on how they were doing and chatting, and if the opportunity came up to say, hey, if there's a need, this sounds like something I'd be interested in, and providing an out to anyone you're talking to, and trying to sort of finesse your ask and make sure it's clear that you don't want to reek of desperation, but you also want to make clear that you're a go-getter, and crafting the right email to say that, or probably in reality the in-person conversation based off the initial connection to say that. For me, it was really just using informal connections, people I knew who either themselves worked in an industry or had a second degree connection who worked in an industry, and just starting a conversation. And from there it became easy, because people like to talk about what they do, because a lot of times no one else in their life wants to talk about what they do, because people get into their niche. So that would be my biggest piece of advice, is just get over the hurdle of shooting an email, shooting a text to someone even if you wouldn't have otherwise, because the worst that can happen is you get a no response. There's very little downside to putting yourself out there.
That's great. Yeah, and I would add to that that concept of it's relationship, right? Like, it's not necessarily the ask. You kind of want to avoid like that binary yes or no. Can you help me with this thing? But that idea of identifying other people who are interested in the same things that you're interested in, and leaning into that. I mean, that's meaningful, because those are the kinds of relationships that actually have some traction, right? They're not based on just the fact that we went to the same school, but we actually are interested in many of the same things. That's great.
I might add to what Andy said.
Nicole, did you have something to jump in really quick, and then to Andrew? Sorry, Nicole raised her hand. I just want to make sure.
Oh, sorry.
Go ahead, Andrew. I already.
No, go ahead, Nola.
We're all friends here. Nicole, go ahead and jump in.
Yeah, please.
Well, I think something that there are certain soft skills, which, like, I hate that term, because the soft skills are the hardest skills. People assume that you're just born knowing how to do it. Just know how to network, and that is absolutely not true. I was not good at it, and I intentionally read books, I found mentors and talked, I practiced, And then like I met the head of the American Psychiatry Association like at a restaurant, because it eventually you practice enough and it just becomes part of who you are. I'm also the oldest person on the panel probably, but the point I'm trying to make is practice and learn about it. And every place that you are, whether it's a restaurant or a conference, is an opportunity. You never know where you are going to find that next role. And I don't mean to say that to say like always be stressed out that like where is my future role, but like it doesn't hurt to have your LinkedIn resume or your business card or whatever it is in your back pocket ready to share if the time comes along, and to know your elevator pitch and drive that conversation.
That's great. Yeah, and very, very practical too. Yeah, and always be ready, right? Always have the radar out. I like that. Andrew, sorry to.
Yeah, I think that's great advice from Nicole. The other thing I was going to add is I would draw some distinction between networking with your peers, which is a really useful way, especially early after graduation, to get a sense of what's going on and what's out there, and just say like, hey, I'm still trying to figure out what I'm doing, but I'm kind of interested in this. Can you keep an eye out for me? That I think was really helpful the first couple of years after college. And then the second piece I think is networking with people who are sort of ahead of where you are in your career. And there I would offer some different advice, which is now being on the receiving end of a lot of those emails and that kind of thing. It really helps to have a specific ask. And the ask won't be, I'm looking for a job. Can you please find a job for me? Because the answer is, I don't, most of the time I don't know you from Adam. So, I don't know what to do with that ask. But if on the other hand, someone's saying, I'm looking for advice on this specific thing, or I've started to get interested in your industry and I'm curious what you guys do about X, or I'm looking for an introduction to someone on your people team or someone on your engineering team who can tell me a little bit more about why. Those kinds of asks, something that you can sort of wrap your head around really quickly as the recipient, are super, super helpful. So it's helpful to have that with the goal of, probably getting help on that particular question, but also being the hook to establish the relationship with the other person. So the relationships that I have with people who have reached out to me cold for networking purposes usually began successfully by them saying, hey, I'm looking to learn a little bit more about this thing. I was hoping you could answer a question for me or introduce me to someone or whatever. And it was super specific. And so for every one of those, I get 10 that are just, do you have 30 minutes for an informational interview? And the answer is almost always no. But if they have something specific, I can help them out. And then it's not weird at all for them 6 months later to come back to me and say, hey, we met 6 months ago and you helped me out with this thing. I have another question for you. Or I'm wondering if a job has popped up that you think I might be the right fit for. And there, the more general ask is a lot more effective if you've already established something specific for someone to hook into first. So that's just like some practical advice I have if you're thinking about cold outreach for people who are in industries that you want to get into or that you sort of vaguely admire. I would ask for something specific and small to build the bridge.
That's great.
Emma, if you have one more thing you want to add to this this thread, and then we have some questions on the chat I'd like to get to.
I actually, so I wanted to add about the networking, and especially in transportation. This was my experience with it, is that networking, I hate that word. I hate it. What I ended up doing was simply motivated by wanting to learn about the industry. And when I was living in Washington, D.C., 22 years old, I met, like Andrew said, folks that were peers of mine, as well as older folks, and I asked them different questions. But the peers, and started with the peers, and this is how I created, or helped create the nonprofit of young professionals in transportation. And it started during the crash, right, post-crash. Turns out there are a lot of other really interesting people that also like transportation. And it's because every field is interesting if you're interested in it. And so these people also wanted to learn about the same things I wanted to learn about. And that's organic networking. That's talking about, what are you doing? What are you working on? How did you get there? And the organization started with 2 people and has grown to international international organization with chapters all across the country. I mean, I was just on a call with work, and turns out this gentleman in the New York office joined joined the nonprofit because I had started these summer tour series of checking out infrastructure projects throughout New York City, going to the top of the George Washington Bridge, going down into the 7-line tunnels that the MTA was building. I mean, going into the rail control room because you wanted to learn about how the trains were operating. So it's all about who you know, and you just have to be yourself. You're all really interesting, talented, smart, special people, and you have a ton of skills, and you don't know what those are yet, and you're never going to know what they all are. You just have to keep learning and hang in there. So that's what I wanted to add about the networking bit.
We had one question online about networking, and it was for those who contacted hundreds to figure out how the field was and that they were interested in. At what point did you decide, well, that's enough, and make the next step? And what was the next step after doing all your informational interviews and questions? Who'd like to answer that? Okay, Emma.
I just spoke. All those phone conversations, it wasn't, I didn't get to a point where it wasn't enough. I got to a point where the pauses occurred because I had to figure out what I liked and what I didn't like. And I kept asking. I kept calling. And the one person I talked to, I asked, who should I speak with? Who do you recommend speaking, who would speak to me and tell me about what they were doing? And one conversation led to another. And I took out the pressure of find a job ASAP. I put on the pressure of what do I actually want to do? Because it's got to be a match. The company's got to have a need, and you've got to have the skills, and you want that to be a good relationship, because there's nothing worse than being in a bad job.
All right, great. And then what's one other question here? What were the specific pros and cons of starting a business or organization during a recession right out of college? Anybody worked a startup that they did themselves? Derek, what have you been, have you had students come in looking to do startups right out of after graduation?
The startup and the tech side is pretty popular right now. I would say, I would kind of bridge that question into a broader question of entrepreneurship, though. They're interrelated in a lot of ways. And from my background, working a lot with the creative careers and the arts, there's also a comparison there. So, one of the things that I'm talking with students right now about, particularly with students who are thinking about that more like freelance style, that more, build it yourself version, a number of industries that don't really have a recruiting mechanism or a standard path that you would be following. In that sense, there is one thing where you can say that this environment where everything's a little topsy-turvy has a bit of a balancing going on here, where people who normally are, in whether it be theater or music or film, particularly if they're making on an independent level or a smaller market level, this is kind of what it always feels like. Right, like there's not a job to apply for. There's not, the funding's in place for you, and so there's a little bit of a bleed over in the current environment where everyone's feeling that they have to sort of like go the back channel. They have to find the connectivity, the relationship building around the referral basis for positions that aren't even being posted. A lot of industries don't necessarily have, they're thinking right now about what comes next and how we can reopen the gates for hiring and those sorts of things. So, in the sense of, starting your own business, there's a whole nother layer to add on to that. But I think in general, the entrepreneurial spirit actually has a little bit of room to run with right now, particularly because you might not have that standard job that you'd be applying for your post-grad entry-level position. If you do have something else that you'd like to be doing, if you want to write that script or that pilot, if you want to start, try in the startup direction, there's actually a little bit of room to play here, just because we're all playing a little bit in the midst of the environment.
Thank you. Well, here's a question I have for everybody, and maybe we'll start with Andy. So what is the one thing you wished you had known or did when you were still a student or a recent grad to help you think about your first job?
I think, well, in retrospect, and we're probably not at the stage of the year where this is helpful advice, but I would have been thinking, I would have been thinking earlier. I think I got sort of stuck on a mental track of, I'm going to do this thing. And frankly, I was really, hoping I would get into that one program, and I had a real vision built around it of how I would do the rest of my career. And when I had to sidestep and make a change, I think that it took me some time to really come to terms with that while I was still in the security blanket of being in school. So thinking early, even if you aren't in constant motion, and just thinking about your next step a little far in advance was a skill that I had to build. And then I think that as Nicole referred to, just having awareness of situational awareness, and starting to think about the things you read in the news and how they're going to directly affect your industry, your career, your well-being, and starting to be a little thoughtful about that. That took me some time. I was certainly one of those people who was insulated. So those would be the big takeaways for me.
Thank you. Anybody else would like to chime in with some, look back at what you would have done that would have helped you get to where you are now? All right. Yes.
I actually wouldn't have done anything differently. And I'm glad I made mistakes, and I'm glad I figured out what I didn't like. And I didn't think of my next step. And because I hadn't figured it out yet. And I definitely made very impulsive decisions. I didn't think them through, and it's all right. I mean, I remember my parents' faces when I was like, I'm moving to Chicago. They were like, what? 6 months before that, I was like, I got a dog. They were like, could I afford a dog? No, it's the best thing I ever did. He's sitting right there. Like, just hang in there and follow your gut, because your gut's not gonna point you in a wrong direction. Thank you.
Nicole, what about you when you made your plunge into TFA? Had you been constant at all thinking about TFA when you were undergrad, or did that just come up at that last moment when you decided not to be a professor?
Yeah, I mean, I had seen a lot of billboards, and I'd heard a lot about it. But, again, it was like, to really get the information, going to the sessions, it was just getting information was not as easily accessible as it is now. But it was quite different once I did it. I really became very embedded in social justice and equity in a way that I hadn't in college. And I'm so grateful, both for my own identity and support of other communities that I had that experience. Yeah, does that answer your question?
Sure. Yes. And Catherine, how about you? Did you have something that you thought you should have known beforehand, or would have loved to have known, and maybe some of our current students would be able to think about that as they take their next steps?
Yeah, I think the main advice that I've had, or things that I keep telling myself, is not to pigeonhole myself, to have such a specific idea and to think that that's the only possible thing that I could do. I think I learned that too late in college, or I wish I learned it earlier, or knew that earlier in college. I kind of realized that at the that there was so much more of a much bigger world out there than what I had decided to focus on. And that's why when I graduated, I wanted to take that gap year, and actually both Jaime and I both applied for TFA because we wanted to do something different than what we were doing before, and we wanted to see what else was out there. And even when I chose definitively to do medicine, there are lots of things that I thought I wanted to do something very specific, and I ended up not doing that, and it's because something came up that led me to a different path. And I guess my biggest advice is not to think that you need to be committed to something specific. Like I never thought I would still be in training now. I'm like the last person in medical school, in my medical school class, to still be in training, but I'm not happy. But it was a kind of a circuitous path to what career I'm going to now.
And Jaime, how about you? What piece of advice would you like to have known before you graduated?
Yeah, I mean, I agree completely with Catherine about not pigeonholing yourself. I also agree with Emma that I'm happy for all the things that I did to get, like, I wouldn't have done anything differently. To know not to pigeonhole yourself is an important thing to know. It's a way to view all the choices that you're making. Your 10-year plan is only useful up until the point when it's not. As soon as when you get another big opportunity, when your heart starts moving in another direction, you're not bound to that 10-year plan. You can move, you can change, and follow that, and you'll find what's right.
And Andrew, did you already share with us what was something that
No, but I
that you
endorse
would have liked to know?
every other panelist's points.
I saw that a question just came through from Pablo that I'm happy to quickly answer.
Okay, great.
We're coming up at time. I don't want to deviate though, but I just
No, please do.
So Pablo's question is about danger of getting comfortable with a first job. I think that, you know, what you want to continuously ask yourself is, even if something isn't in line with your broader values and goals, is, are you gaining skills or building relationships that you really, that like make you want to wake up the next day to show up? And if not, it's good to still get a paycheck and then use that time to figure out what you do want. My regret, and regret's a strong word. I'm grateful for a lot of the decisions that I made and where it landed me, but I wanted to leave education years before I did, and I was scared. And so I would say, ask yourself why you're staying, and, you know, kind of confront that and have that conversation with yourself, journal, and take the comfort that it gives you, but don't be so comfortable that you're not making moves. And then you look back and say, like, I don't regret that experience, but I regret how long I was in it. That's how I feel.
And did anyone else have a contribution to make about how long you felt that you stayed at your first stop along your path? Would you have jumped on sooner, or just happy with continuing to grow in that position that you were in?
Oh,
yes.
I'll add to that. I think the thing I learned about, I left WMATA. My position there was full-time, but it was only limited for a year because of the budget. And I ended up leaving a couple months early because a lot of personal things happened, and I had to get out of Washington, D.C. And so I did go back to my parents for about 6 weeks, and it was the most anxious 6 weeks of my whole life, because the opportunity in New York was in the works, but it hadn't been finalized yet. And I learned from that position, from that jump, that I wanted to avoid doing that again, because I was not yet comfortable with uncertainty. And becoming comfortable with uncertainty is a huge mark of maturity, development. I mean, no one's going to teach you how to do that. You have to figure that out. And right now, given the current state of things, everything is uncertain. We don't know how long we're going to be in this. We don't know. We don't. And humans can endure suffering much easier if humans know there's an end date. And I didn't know there was an end date in those 6 weeks because I was waiting for the company to offer me a job. So what I wanted to add is hang in there, and everything's going to be, everything's going to be all right. And I know I've said that multiple times, but just keep telling yourself that, because it will.
Well, that's a great positive way to come to the end of our session. It's now 8:20, and we've done a little bit longer than the hour that normal webinars are, but I think that it was very important for everyone to hear your journeys and your stories. Thank you so much for sharing them with us. I'd like to now give Derek one last chance to add any final comments about how OCS might be able to assist both current students and alumni.
Sure, yeah. Important just to know that we're partners in this with you. I think many seniors have been working with our office, and we will continue to work throughout the summer, setting up appointments, helping to oversee materials and talk through strategies, application, online resources, the jobs boards that I mentioned, like as they become more active, as we see, the world wake back up again. And I also wanted to just underline that networking piece, which I think we talked about a couple of different times, that this really is a really, in some ways, like a great opportunity to actually connect with people who in some ways they're online more. There's more of a channel to them. They have a little bit more time on their hands and availability and willingness to connect and start those relationships. So making sure that you're taking advantage of things like the class lists within the Yale Career Link, the new cross-campus resource that's available through YAA, as well as using external resources like LinkedIn and the Yale alumni section on LinkedIn. So you're supported. We have resources for you, but also the patience that I think was spoken towards a few times in this panel. It's a longer game, and even if this first bit feels a little rough, it'll smooth its way out, and with the support of our office, but also alumni and other helpful people along the way, the path will get righted, and we'll all move forward together with this. So be patient, and best of luck with everything.
Yes, best of luck to each one of our panelists and each one of you who came to listen and participate in our webinar. If you're interested in joining 1stGenYale, which helps sponsor this meeting, you can sign up. This webinar is being recorded, so you'll be able to see this on the recording. We also have an email by which you can contact us and a website, 1stgenyale.org. And we're on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks to all the panel. I appreciate it.
Bye-bye.